Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. The promise of freedom, the open road, the excitement of the unknown, and the belief that anything is possible are the starting points of every road trip. However, what if the unknown turns out to be more darker than you had anticipated? Welcome to the Verified Fears Horror Stories channel, where you will discover real-life roadside horror stories that will make you wonder about every mile you drive. I'm releasing the top 12 spooky true road trip terror stories tonight. You'll never see an empty roadway the same way again after reading these disturbing accounts. Hit subscribe, enable notifications, and leave a comment below with your own harrowing road trip tale if you believe you have the courage to face the reality. Without peeking over their shoulder, let's see who can finish. Because the dread is always genuine on this channel, there is a pause. It feels old, almost sensual, as it sets over the northern British Columbian wilderness. You become aware of how isolated you are from the outside world when you experience the kind of silence that seeps into your bones. When Ethan and Mark, two brothers on the verge of maturity, embarked on their long-awaited summer road trip in the mid-1990s, that quiet served as both a promise and a warning. The older, 18-year-old Ethan was excited to experience independence prior to attending college, but Mark, who was just 16, was happy to follow his brother's example and had complete faith in him, as younger siblings frequently do. They started their voyage with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from being young and having a full tank of petrol. They had plotted a course that would get them from their little settlement in southern British Columbia to Prince Rort's rocky shore. Their anxious yet encouraging parents had insisted on daily they put emergency cash into their hands and made phone calls. Persuaded that nothing terrible ever actually occurred on the open road, the brothers dismissed the cautions with a laugh. The first 2 days were a haze of roadside eateries, pine trees, and mountain views. Their voices reverberated into the emptiness as they camped near lakes and shared ghost stories around the fire. Only on the third day did the mood started to change. The dust descended over Highway 37. The highway wound through many trees like a ribbon of damaged asphalt. It's the kind of area where everything seems to be limited to you and the road. Mark's uneasiness increased with each mile as he watched the gas gauge drop further and further. Ever the optimist, Ethan promised him they will soon find a place to relax. However, it became evident that they were alone as the sun bled out behind the trees. It was a relief when they eventually came onto a gravel pull-off, partially obscured by overgrown bush. They turned off the engine and parked at the far end, away from the road. There was an instantaneous and complete hush. Only the distant call of an owl and the ticking of the cooling engine interrupted. As the last of the light faded, they ate a cold dinner on the car's hood. When Mark attempted to call home, his phone flickered to no service after showing just 1 bar. To avoid coming seen as naive, he kept it from Ethan. After locking the doors, they got inside the car and made an effort to settle in. Curled up in his sleeping bag, Mark listened to the sounds of the forest as it breathed. He made an effort to concentrate on Ethan's steady, serene breathing pattern. However, he couldn't help but think about wolves, bears, and other unnamed threats that may be waiting just outside the tree line. Strange nightmares and the odd snap of a twig outside interrupted the restless sleep. Uncertain of what had woken him, Mark woke up with a start and his heart racing. The windows were foggy from their breath, and the automobile was damp and cold. He lay motionless for a moment, listening. Then he heard it, a steady, methodical crunching sound, like footsteps on gravel. Trying to see through the moisture, he held his breath. Initially, There was nothing but the reflection of his own pale face and the hazy forms of trees. Then there was movement, a shadow that was too tall and straight to be an animal, moving near the car. Whispered Ethan's name while reaching across to shake his shoulder. Ethan rubbed his eyes, sat up, and moaned. Mark made a shaky hand sign for silence. They listened together. The footsteps circled the automobile once more, louder this time. Ethan's expression turned pale. In the stress and darkness, he fumbled the keys onto the floor instead of reaching for them. A face materialized at the driver's side window out of nowhere. Mark could see the man's crazed expression and the lines carved into his skin since he was close enough. When the man smiled, yellowed, he flattened his fingers on the glass and gritted his teeth. Mark flinched, gasping for air in quick, shallow breaths. There were two figures, one at the passenger side and another at the rear window. Mark spotted 5 individuals in all with shabby, dark clothing and haggard, hungry-looking faces. One of them rattled the handle of the passenger door. Someone else started tapping a metallic object against the glass. With a start of fear, Mark recognized it, a knife. As though they were accustomed to waiting for their prey to make a mistake, men moved with an odd predatory patience. When Ethan eventually located the keys, his hands were shaking so much that he almost dropped them. He turned after jamming them into the ignition. The headlights threw a harsh, unnatural light on the men as the engine stuttered and then roared to life. They halted for a moment, like startled creatures caught in the glare. Then they rushed forward, beating on the doors and windows. As though on cue, Ethan pressed the throttle and slammed the car into gear. The car lurched forward, just missing one of the men, who staggered back with a growl as the tires spun on the loose gravel before catching. As they sped onto the highway, Mark's gaze was filled with both relief and fear as he glanced back. The men's features were unreadable as they watched them leave from the edge of the pull-off. Miles passed in silence as they drove. The engine's roar and their own labored breathing were the only sounds. On the steering wheel, Ethan's knuckles were white. Mark gazed out the window, half expecting to see figures running alongside the car or headlights in the rearview mirror. They eventually arrived at a truck stop that was flooded with intense fluorescent light, and they remained there for a while without wanting to get out. Ethan eventually called their parents by making up a tale about automotive issues. They made no reference to the men or the fear that had almost overwhelmed them. It seemed unreal, like a shared nightmare. They slept in shifts that night, with one person constantly watching the parking lot. Although Ethan made an effort to shrug it off, Mark could see the anxiety still present in his eyes. They wouldn't stop anywhere that wasn't packed and well lit for the remainder of the journey. Even if it meant traveling hours away, they stayed on the main highways and avoided pull-offs and smaller roads. Both of them were troubled by the image of those faces against the glass. When they eventually made it home, they made an effort to move past the situation. On other nights, however, when all was silent and the shadows appeared to wander freely, Mark would awaken with a start, convinced that he could hear footsteps outside his window. Haunted by remorse, Ethan grew aloof. He accused himself of not protecting his own safety by stopping in such a remote location. My brother. The memories remained constant even after the brothers grew up, attended college, and had their own families. Once established, the fear spread and intensified. Mark was unable to resist the draw of the past and ended up traveling the same section of highway years later. The forest had the same appearance. It was tall, dark, and infinite. Half expecting to see the men waiting, he slowed as he passed the pull-off. However, the lot was weed-filled and deserted. While the motor was idle, he parked and tried to figure out what had happened all those years ago. He pondered whether the men were fugitives, drifters, or something else. The recollection itself was nearly as bad as the ignorance. In search of answers, he made inquiries at nearby eateries and gas stations. The majority simply shrugged. "You're lucky, youngster," said an elderly truck driver with a face like old leather, leaning in close and whispering, "because there are things in those woods that don't want to be found. It's best to avoid asking too many questions." The old man's words echoed in Mark's head as he departed, and when he got home, He and Ethan discussed that evening for the first time in a long time. Years passed, and they exchanged memories, trying to fill in the gaps. Mark recalled the men's icy, lifeless gaze, and Ethan recalled the men's slow, methodical movements, as if they weren't scared of being discovered. They both recalled the overpowering sense of powerlessness, the assurance that the story became a family cautionary tale, and they locked their doors religiously, even in the safest neighborhoods, and warned their own children whether to trust the silence of the wilderness or to stop on deserted roads. The fear, which had been a shadow in the back of their minds, became a part of who they were. Ethan suffered from nightmares, and occasionally, Mark would wake up in the middle of the night, his heart pounding, certain that he could hear footsteps outside, and he would lie in bed, holding his breath until the sensation subsided. Other times, he would find himself staring out the window at the darkness, looking for movement, for any indication that the men had followed him home. He saw a therapist and tried to explain away the fear, but it persisted. He thought about what might have happened if the car hadn't started, if they'd had to face the men outside. The possibilities haunted him. He was reliving the moment when the engine wouldn't start, when the men pressed closer, their faces inches from his own. Their father became silent and reclusive, their mother mourned, and the episode became a ghost in the family, haunting reunions and holidays. Eventually, they discovered the truth, pieced together from bits and pieces overheard in late-night chats. As a reminder of how swiftly things can change, Mark developed an obsession with true crime, reading everything he could about unsolved cases and disappearances along isolated highways. He came across tales of families who were never seen again, hitchhikers who went missing, and cars discovered abandoned on the side of the road. Each story felt like a fragment of the brothers, eventually drifted apart, the trauma of that night creating a distance neither could bridge, and they spoke less frequently, their conversations stilted and awkward, but the bond forged in fear endured. He wondered how many others had encountered the men in the night, and how many hadn't been as lucky. Remained an unspoken understanding that no one else could share. The world changed over time, with cell phones becoming commonplace and GPS making it more difficult to get lost. But the wilderness remained vast and uncaring, the roads still winding through the same endless forests, and the silence as deep as ever. There were moments when Mark wondered if the men were still out there, waiting for the next car to pull off the highway, for the next pair of brothers to drop their guard. He never knew who they were, what they wanted, whether they were thieves, killers, or something else entirely. And the uncertainty became a source of its own horror, an unanswerable question. The tale of the men in the night eventually became a legend in Mark's imagination, a warning to anybody who would listen. He told his kids, his friends, and anybody else who would listen, follow your gut, lock your doors, never undervalue the darkness, and occasionally, when the world seems to be falling apart, is quiet and the shadows are long. He recalls the sensation of the cold glass against his skin, the sound of footsteps circling the car, and the realization that evil can find you even in the middle of nowhere. If you have ever had a terrifying road trip, please share it in the comments section below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please subscribe to the Verified Fears Horror Stories channel for more real-life stories that will keep you awake at night. Let's go on to our second story, a true story that will make you doubt every car you see in your rearview mirror. The Patel family's road trip was meant to be a celebration, but sometimes the real tragedy is closer than you think. Be careful out there. It was the kind of trip that families dream about, a minivan filled with snacks, music, and the promise of adventure. For the first few days, everything went as planned as Raj and Sunita saved 4 months to take their 2 kids, Arjun and Priya, on a cross-country trip from Vancouver to Toronto. The road's novelty had worn off by the time they arrived in Saskatchewan's prairies, where the kids squabbled in the back seat, the snacks ran out, and the endless stretches of highway started to blend together. They marveled at the Rockies, stopped at odd roadside attractions, and made memories along the way. It was on one of these boring stretches that the first hints of unease appeared. The sun was high, the air heavy with the smell of gasoline in wild grass, and the family poured into a small, dusty gas station just outside a town called Swift Current. Sunita took the kids inside to use the restroom and get cold drinks while Raj filled the tank, and she could feel the weight of someone's eyes inside the store. As she looked up, she noticed a man standing by the magazine rack, staring at her. He was an ordinary man with thinning hair, a faded blue jacket, and average height, but there was something unnerving about the way he watched her. Sunita was unblinking and determined, hurrying the kids along, paying for their purchases, and leaving the store with an unexplainable tightness in her chest. When she got back to the car, she whispered, "People look, especially in small towns." "Don't worry." She wanted to believe him. They belted the kids in, backed out of the gas station, and merged back onto the highway, the event already fading. She told Raj about the man, but he dismissed it. Sunita noticed the same man's car, a battered silver sedan, pull out of the gas station and fall in behind them within minutes. But she didn't think much of it at first, because there weren't many roads out here, and it was only natural that another traveler would be heading east. However, as the miles passed, the sedan remained a constant presence in the midst of travel fatigue. Sunita tried to divert her attention with music, discussion, and the never-ending effort of keeping the kids entertained. But every time she looked in the rearview mirror, the sedan was there. It never approached too closely, never attempted to overtake, but it also never fell far behind. She brought it up to Raj, who shrugged. "Coincidence," he said, but his tone was less certain this time. They pulled into a busy fast food restaurant in Moose for lunch, and while they were eating, Sunita looked out the window at the parking lot. A few minutes later, the silver sedan did indeed pull in. "Let's just get back on the road," Sunita murmured, trying to maintain her composure as she told Raj, who became visibly anxious. But the man refused to get out and sat in his car, staring straight ahead, hands holding the steering wheel. Raj tried to lose him by making an unexpected detour, reversing back via a tiny village and resuming the highway hours later. But for a fleeting, hopeful moment, the sedan's silent shadow followed them back onto the highway. When the silver sedan appeared in the mirror, as though it had been waiting for them, the family relaxed, laughing, returning to the car as the children played games in the back seat. But Sunita's heart fell as they merged into the main highway once more. The man's perseverance showed unnerving. He had no reason to follow them, no indication of road rage or miscommunication. He never tried to speak. He just followed, mile after mile, hour after hour. The kids could feel the tension, and as the day went on, their voices became lower. As the afternoon moved to dark, the family became desperate. When Arjun, the older of the two, inquired if everything was all right, Sunita attempted a smile and assured him not to worry, but her hands trembled as she adjusted the air conditioner. Raj held the wheel so firmly that his knuckles turned white. When they finally got through to a dispatcher, they were informed that there wasn't much anybody could do, saying, "Unless he's threatening you or breaking the law, there's not much we can do." In a regretful but forceful voice, they attempted to call the police, but mobile connection was weak in the rural areas, aimed to avoid crowded places. However, there were only vast fields, the occasional farmhouse, and the ubiquitous silver sedan no occupied areas. Long shadows were created across the road as the sun dropped low. The headlights of the minivan flicked on, lighting up the deserted highway in front of them. The lights in the vehicle behind them were like twin eyes, unrelenting and unblinking. The family's fear increased as night fell. Every sound sounded louder. The clatter of loose change in a cup holder, the hum of the tires, and the apprehensive murmurs between Raj and Sunita. The kids dozed off, snuggled up in the back car, oblivious to the threat that followed them around all night. Despite Raj's best efforts to remain composed, Sunita could sense the terror in his eyes. Whispering, "What does he want?" Raj gave a head shake. They continued to drive 4 hours on end, fatigue beginning to set in. "I don't know, but we can't stop. Not until we lose him." Ahead, The roadway extended indefinitely, a dark ribbon surrounded by woodlands and farmland. They occasionally passed another vehicle, such as a truck or car, but the sedan never moved, never passed, and never fell behind. Rog once pulled into a rest area in the hopes that the man would be put off by the other passengers. Additionally, a sedan arrived and parked at the far end of the lot. Rog watched the man through the rearview mirror while the engine sat idle. The man didn't look away or move. Rog abandoned up after 10 minutes and retreated into the highway. The sedan came next. Sunita became angry instead of afraid. At a small-town stoplight, she rolled down her window and yelled at the man, wanting to know why he was pursuing them. The man looked straight ahead, seemingly oblivious to her words. The minivan drove off as the light changed to green, with the sedan following closely behind. The family was on the verge of collapse by midnight. The kids slept in fits and woke up occasionally to inquire about their whereabouts. Sunita's hands were shaking as she gripped the seat, her nerves strained. Rog's voice was the result of hours of hush planning, and his eyes were bloodshot. A big truck's lights finally stopped in front of them, a glimmer of optimism amid the shadows. Rog parked his car as near to the entrance as he could. The air was heavy with the smell of fried food and diesel, and the lot was packed with semis and travelers. The man's face was obscured by shadows as the sedan slowly made its way around the lot. He appeared to pause for a time. After that, he retreated along the highway and vanished into the night. Sitting in startled stillness was the family. They watched the road for 30 minutes, the relief nearly overwhelming, but the sedan never came back. Upon entering, the bright lighting and cacophonous conversation felt like a haven. The man was never seen by them again. The remainder of their journey went by without any problems. However, they were plagued by the memories of that night. Convinced she spotted headlights outside her window, Sunita would wake up in the middle of the night with her heart pounding. Rog grew extremely alert, often glancing in the rearview mirror and being cautious of vehicles that followed them for an extended period of time. The family stayed close to home or flew instead of taking road vacations 4 years following that. The story became a family tradition, a warning recited at parties and on special occasions, even after the kids grew up. Sunita would advise friends and family to follow their gut feelings and never deny the sensation that they were being observed. They were altered by the encounter. They become more watchful and cognizant of the risks that come with driving on the open road. The world seemed a bit less secure and a bit more uncertain, and each time they embarked on a new adventure, they couldn't resist looking in the rearview mirror, plagued by the image of the unforgiving stranger who made their ideal getaway into a nightmare. However, it was not the end of the story. Years later, Arjun, who was now a young man, was returning after a late-night drive by himself, wedding of a buddy. He saw a car behind him with its headlights blazing in his mirror as he turned into the highway. His heart pounded briefly as old anxieties surfaced, but he was left alone with his recollections as the automobile drove past him and disappeared into the night. Then he understood how profoundly he was impacted by the encounter, and it changed the way he perceived the world. The following day, he informed his mother about the drive over the phone. Sunita listened in a soft voice. She said, "You're safe," as the Patel family story reminds us, but always trust your instincts. The most scary threats can occasionally be the threats that lurk just out of sight, the ones that never show themselves. It's a tale of terror, uncertainty, and the ability of family to get through even the worst of times. You are aware of how easily the familiar may become sinister. If you have ever experienced the prickling feeling of being watched, or if you have ever looked in your mirror and noticed the same car miles away. Although the wide road offers freedom, it also presents vulnerability because of the sharp contrast between safety and danger. Thus, keep the Patel family in mind the next time you embark on an adventure. Always keep vigilant, trust your gut, and never assume that you are safe. Because sometimes what you see in front of you isn't the true horror. It's what refuses to let you go. following you 4 miles on end. If you've ever been followed, observed, or intimidated while traveling, please share your tale in the comments section below. Someone else could use your experience as a caution to keep safe. For more factual stories that will keep you on your toes, don't forget to subscribe to the Verified Fears Horror Stories channel. Be careful out there and keep in mind, the things that never reveal their faces might occasionally be the most terrifying. Let's go on to the third tale. A real story that demonstrates that often the most alarming risks on the road are those that appear to be friendly. Best friends Emily and Sarah made the decision to drive across the American Midwest the summer after their sophomore year. Both of them were 20 years old, brimming with restless energy and the confidence that comes from never having been really fearful. They had a straightforward plan: travel to Denver from their Iowa college town, making stops at every strange roadside landmark they could come across. They promised their parents that they would stay on major routes and check in every night. So they loaded up their small blue hatchback with snacks, mixtapes, and a tent. They were expected to have a lifelong memory of the journey. Indeed, it was, but not because they had hoped. They had every dream throughout the first 2 days. They ate pie at a UFO-shaped cafe, snapped selfies with enormous plastic cows, and camped under starry sky that simultaneously made them feel small and limitless. When their parents warned them against scary films, they chuckled about how ladies like them made all the wrong decisions. "We're not stupid," Emily replied, smiling at Sarah across the bonfire and tossing her hair. "We know how to take care of ourselves." They left Kansas City on the third day and moved west, where the terrain leveled out into endless wheat and corn fields. The air was heavy and buzzing with the sound of insects, and the sun was high. With their windows down and their hair blowing in the wind, they sang along to the radio. It was one of those days that seemed to go on forever. However, the car's petrol gauge continued to drop by the late afternoon. Emily scowled at the dashboard while behind the wheel. Her voice was tight with concern as she remarked, "We should have filled up back in that last town." 10 miles ahead, they passed a sign for a town called Harper. "We'll make it," Emily remarked, trying to sound assured, but they didn't. Sarah took out her phone, but the service was poor and the map wouldn't load. The motor stuttered and died 5 miles later. They sat in silence for a minute, the reality of their predicament weighing down on them, thick blanket, as the car coasted to a stop at the side of a narrow 2-lane road, the field on each side golden and empty, the closest farmhouse a speck on the horizon. Finally, Sarah forced a laugh and added, "Well, shit, at least it's not dark yet." After getting out, they stretched their legs and looked over the horizon. Emily tried her phone, but there was no one on the road, save for the wind rippling over the crops. No service. Sarah got on the car's roof and waved her arms at the deserted road, but nobody arrived. An hour went by. The sun dipped, the light softened and turned golden, and Emily began to worry seriously. She added, "We can't sit here all night. We have to get to that town before it gets dark." Emily felt a wave of relief when Sarah nodded. But before they could begin to move, a decrepit white van loomed on the horizon, getting bigger as it got closer. The van slowed as it approached, squealing its brakes and pulling over to the shoulder. The driver's window slid down, and a man in his late 30s leaned out and smiled, saying, "Car trouble." He called in a happy tone. He nodded sympathetically as Emily described their predicament, saying, "Hap out here," adding, "I can give you a ride into Harper. A gas station is located there. I'll even return you." Emily paused, looking at Sarah. The man appeared to be amiable enough. A faded t-shirt, clean-shaven pants, and a wedding ring gleaming on his finger. But she felt worried about something in his eyes. Even yet, the sky was getting darker, and it seemed even less tempting to trek 5 miles down an empty road. "All right," she said at last. "Thank you. That's quite considerate." The man slipped open the side door of the van and leapt out. The van's inside was devoid of seats, and the carpet was discolored. In their 30s, 2 additional males sat in the rear and watched the females, whose faces are impossible to decipher. Emily's discomfort increased, but she made herself grin. "Hi," she murmured in a shaky voice. Without a word, the men nodded. The driver motioned for the girls to get into the car. Sarah, always the bigger of the two, shrugged and climbed inside, while Emily hesitated. Emily trailed behind, her pulse racing. Old smokes and perspiration filled the van. The driver re-entered the vehicle and lurched onto the road. Emily gripped her purse in her lap and sat as close to Sarah as she could. Silently, the guys in the rear observed them. There was silence for several minutes. The engine's hum and the rattling of loose tools in the rear were the only sounds audible. Emily inquired about the town in an attempt to strike up a discussion. However, the men's responses were brief. With icy eyes, the driver looked at her in the mirror. Emily saw as they drove that they were not going to Harper. The path led farther into the fields and veered off course from where they had come. Sarah's eyes widened as she whispered, "This isn't right." She looked across to the driver. "We're heading to Harper, right?" The driver remained silent. The larger, thicker-bearded man next to him chuckled quietly. His words, change of plans, a wave of panic swept Emily. The door handle was locked as she reached for it. Sarah grasped her hand and squeezed snug. The soldiers in the rear moved in closer, obstructing any escape route with their bodies. In order to enter a stand of trees, the driver slowed the van and turned onto a gravel road. Emily's thoughts were racing. Every horror film she had ever seen and every caution her parents had given her came to mind. She tried to recall if she had said if someone would come looking for them, where they were heading. With the engine running, the van came to a stop in a clearing. The men's faces were grim as they turned to look at the females. Emily shook her voice and yelled, "What do you want?" The bearded man smiled. He remarked, "Just a little fun." Tears came to Sarah's eyes. "Please," she said in a whisper, "just let us go." Nobody said anything for a while. The driver then looked across at the other males. He remarked, "We don't need this kind of trouble. Let's simply reclaim them." The man with the beard frowned. "Why? They'll call the police." The driver gave a head shake. "We release them. They will be too afraid to speak. It's not worth it anyway." The men's voices were low and strained as they argued. Sarah and Emily sat motionless, too scared to get up. At last, the driver faced them, his expression unreadable. "Get out," he said. Stumbling on unsteady legs, Emily and Sarah clambered out of the van. The motorist gestured toward the road. "That's how the town is. Don't turn around." They fled, afraid to look behind them. They heard the van drive away as its engine roared to life. In the distance, the sound faded. They ran till their lungs burned and Harper's lights came into view. Breathless and trembling, they staggered into the petrol station and pleaded with the attendant to contact the police. The van had long since vanished when the cops took their statement. The girls' car remained undamaged where they had left it. The males were never seen again. The encounter was altered. Emily became cautious and suspicious of new people. Sarah suffered from nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night to the smell of cigarettes and the sound of engines. They remained friends, but their shared awareness of how easily things might go wrong took the place of their carefree road trip laughs. Years later, Emily would discover headlights pierce the darkness as she drove alone late at night. Her palms would clench on the wheel as her heart raced whenever she noticed a van in her mirror. The lesson she had learned on that lonely drive stayed with her forever. The monsters who resemble everyone else might sometimes be the most horrifying. You are aware of how easily compassion may be transformed into dread if you have ever trusted someone out of necessity or taken assistance from a complete stranger. There is freedom on the open road. However, danger might also lurk there in plain sight. Therefore, keep Emily and Sarah in mind the next time you're stuck. Follow your gut, be vigilant, and never get in a car with someone who makes you uncomfortable. If you've ever been offered a ride that didn't feel right or gotten out of a potentially dangerous situation, please share your story in the comments section below. Someone else may use your experience as a caution to keep safe. For more real stories that will keep you on your toes, Don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fears Horror Stories channel. Be careful out there, and keep in mind that the threats that come with a grin can occasionally be the most terrifying. Now let's move on to our fourth tale, one that will make you wonder what actually stalks the open road and blur the boundaries between the otherworldly and reality. Rachel had, for as long as she could recall, enjoyed taking road excursions, the hum of the motor, the unending ribbon of highway, and the way the world seemed to open up when you left the city behind were all comforting to her. Although Tyler, her boyfriend, preferred to stay at home, he loved Rachel enough to give in to her desire to travel. That's how they ended up on a cold October night, driving across the desolate roadways of Wyoming, the surrounding area engulfed in darkness and the sky full with stars. Hiking in Yellowstone, they had marveled at geysers and watched herds of bison roam the grasslands during the day. They had hours of driving ahead of them before they arrived at their Casper motel, because the sun had already set when they left the park. Eager to escape the monotony of the freeway and to get a peek of the untamed, deserted landscapes she so adored, Rachel insisted on traveling the back roads. Tyler concurred, but as the GPS guided them onto more remote and small roads, his enthusiasm waned. The darkness that closed in on all sides was hardly broken by their headlights. The first hour went by in friendly quiet. Tyler slept in the passenger seat as Rachel drove, her hands steady on the wheel. The only noises were the distant howl of the wind, the motor, and the sporadic thump of the tires over a pothole. Rachel might occasionally notice the dim illumination of a farmhouse, although they were mostly alone. But there was the silhouette of a barn against the night sky. The feeling of being alone, of being the only people in the world, thrilled her. As the night went on, that sensation started to change. The shoulder trees crowded closer as the road became rougher. As the temperature dropped, a thin, whirling mist started to rise from the fields within the headlight beams. Abruptly uncomfortable, Rachel switched off the radio. The darkness felt more oppressive and heavier, but she was unable to explain why. Tyler looked at the clock and rubbed his eyes as he stirred. It was almost midnight. His voice was heavy with sleep when he said, "Are we almost there?" "An additional hour," Rachel said, feigning a smile. "If you'd like, you can return to your sleep." Tyler gave a head shake. "We'll stay up together. It feels strange in this place." Relieved to have him around, Rachel nodded. She made an effort to dispel the dread, convincing herself that it was only due to the strange road and the late hour. However, she noticed something that made her breath catch in her throat as they turned a corner. In the distance, a pair of headlights grew brighter as they got closer. Initially, Rachel experienced a rush of comfort. They weren't totally alone because they had another car. However, she became aware that something was wrong as the car approached. The headlights appeared to float above the road, undulating from side to side, and were set to wide and to high. The mist was illuminated in weird swirling patterns by the bright, white, and blinding light. Tyler narrowed his eyes, attempting to discern the vehicle's shape. He questioned, "Is that a truck?" With a nod, Rachel reduced the speed of the vehicle as the headlights glared at them. The truck was traveling too quickly for this type of road. Her tires crunched on the gravel shoulder as she drew as far to the right as she could. The vehicle did not slow down. With its lights blazing and its horn blaring, it charged at them. As the truck veered into their lane, Rachel clutched the wheel, her heart racing. "Be careful, Rachel," Tyler yelled. She applied the brakes firmly. The vehicle skidded to a halt. The truck filled her vision for a moment. An ancient, rusting semi with broken windows and a snarled grille. The headlights' brilliance obscured the driver's face, making it a blur. Confident that they were going to die, Rachel prepared for impact. However, the truck actually went through them. There was a bone-chilling cold that suddenly crept into Rachel's skin and left her gasping for air. There was no crash or sound of metal on metal. There was no crash or sound of metal on metal. The headlights disappeared as the darkness engulfed them. There was nobody on the road ahead. Tyler and Rachel were silent for a bit. The automobile was idling in the middle of the road, while they sat in startled silence. Rachel could hardly keep her hands on the wheel due to their extreme shaking. Pale-faced, Tyler reached over. He murmured, "What the hell was that?" With tears running down her cheeks, Rachel shook her head. The car's engine stuttered and died when she tried to start it. Anxiety swept through her. Tyler tried to comfort her, but his voice faltered as he said, "What if the truck returned? What if they were stranded here, alone in the dark?" Everything appeared to be normal when he went out to peek under the hood. A few minutes later, the engine coughed to life and the automobile started up again. With her eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds, Rachel drove gently as she retreated onto the road. The remainder of the drive flew by, shaken and fatigued. They arrived at their motel shortly before daybreak. They didn't both get any sleep. They attempted to interpret the events. However, the recollection of the truck, the way it had suddenly materialized, and how it had silently gone by them, was inexplicable. They described what they had witnessed and asked around at a nearby diner the following day. The elderly, gentle-eyed waitress listened patiently and then nodded. She said, "You saw the ghost truck. It always takes place on that section of road, every few years. Once, my cousin saw it, claimed that it almost caused him to lose control. According to some, it's the ghost of a truck driver who passed away years ago. Some claim it's merely a light trick. However, you're not alone, and you won't be the final one." With the waitress's words still ringing in their ears, Rachel and Tyler quietly departed the cafe. When their journey came to an end, the excitement had vanished and had been replaced by a persistent feeling of fear. Rachel never drove at night again, unless absolutely necessary, and she never again took back roads. Tyler attempted to dismiss it with a laugh, but Rachel, every time they went by a truck on the highway, they could see the terror in his eyes. Years passed, yet the recollection remained strong. Rachel would occasionally awaken in the middle of the night with a pounding heart, convinced that she could hear an engine roaring and a horn blaring, wondering if the phantom vehicle was still out there waiting for its next victim. She would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling. She'd read all she could find, learn about the legend. There are tales of drivers who were left stranded on the side of the road with no starting engines after they saw the truck and experienced the same bone-deep cold. According to some, the truck was a death harbinger and a warning. Others asserted that it was the restless soul of a man who had been wronged and was destined to spend all of eternity driving the same section of highway. Rachel never got a response. She tried to leave the past behind after moving to the city and starting a family, but occasionally she would find herself driving late at night with the road stretching out in front of her and the darkness closing in. She would also recall the ghost vehicle, how it had suddenly materialized, and how it had moved through her like a shadow, leaving only horror in its wake. If you've ever been on a nighttime drive down a desolate road and felt that you are aware of how easily the familiar may become weird, which is why the hair on the back of your neck stands up without cause, there is freedom on the open road. However, it's also a place where the dead refuse to rest and where the past lingers. Thus, keep Rachel and Tyler in mind the next time you notice headlights in your mirror. Keep in mind that things on the road are not always what they seem, and hope that a phantom truck lets you pass if you ever find yourself facing one. Leave a comment below if you have a similar experience, or if you have ever come across something on the road that you are unable to explain. Someone else may use your experience as a caution to keep safe. For more real stories that will keep you on your toes, don't forget to subscribe to Verified Fears Horror Stories channel. Be careful out there. Additionally, keep in mind that often the most terrifying situations are the ones you can't predict. Now let's go to the fifth story. A genuine story that will cause you to doubt not just the strangers you encounter while traveling, but also the individuals who have vowed to keep you safe. For Jess had trusted the world for the majority of her existence. She had grown up in a small Indiana town where everyone knew one another. The cops were friends and neighbors, and a lost dog or a fender bender was the worst thing that could possibly happen. At the age of 22, she made the decision to go on a road trip with her three best friends, Maya, Leah, and Hannah, before the obligations of adulthood engulfed them. After completing college, they were optimistic about the future. Similar to an open roadway, they intended to go by car from their hometown to Chicago, then to St. Louis, Memphis, and New Orleans across the heartland. It was a final experience before the real world started, a rite of passage. There was a lot of music and fun during the first part of the journey, snacks and the kind of inside jokes that only lifelong friends can exchange filled the car. They alternated driving, stopping at inexpensive motels and oddball roadside sites while capturing every moment for their Instagram accounts. They believed that nothing bad could ever happen to them, and that they were untouchable and indestructible. Somewhere on the second night, and it was in southern Illinois, that things started to fall apart. Due to traffic jams and summer storms, they had left Chicago late, and it was long after midnight when they arrived to the rural routes. With only the headlights and the occasional flash of lightning on the horizon for illumination, the world outside the automobile was a jumble of darkness and cornfields. When Jess noticed the red and blue lights in the rearview mirror, she was driving with tired eyes. She felt a wave of relief. The sight of a police cruiser felt like a reminder that they were still connected to the outside world, and she had been struggling to stay awake. The cruiser stopped behind them, so she slowed and rolled down her window, pulling onto the shoulder. The cop, flashlight in hand, came slowly up. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and the changing shadows made it difficult to interpret his face. His emblem shone in the light, and his clothing was immaculate. "Evening, ladies," he said in a composed yet commanding tone. "Where are you headed?" Jess said, her voice quivering a little from anxiety as she described their road trip. With a nod, the officer paused on each of their faces and shone his light into the car. Something about the flatness and lack of warmth in his gaze unnerved Jess. He continued, "I need you to get out of the car," in a tone that made no room for debate. Despite exchanging anxious looks, the girls followed instructions. While requesting their identification, the officer arranged them in a shoulder line. After carefully examining each one, he returned them. "It's too late for you females to be out here." Jess felt a glimmer of relief as he stated, "These roads can be dangerous. There's been some trouble in the area. Break-ins, assaults. I'm going to escort you to a safer place." Perhaps he was simply being cautious, keeping an eye on them. However, a knot of uneasiness knotted in her stomach as the officer returned to his cruiser and motioned for them to follow. The police car led the way, its lights flashing in the dark as they drove 4 miles. The cornfields pressed in on both sides of the road as it became smaller. Jess couldn't remember where they were. There were no houses, no street signs, just endless rows of corn, and the GPS had stopped working. The cruiser eventually turned into a gravel road that was just a little bit too narrow for the vehicle. When Jess paused, the officer urged her to move forward by flashing his lights once again. The road wound deeper into the meadows, and she followed, her heart racing. A ramshackle barn loomed silhouetted against the sky as they arrived at a clearing. With a gesture for them to park, the officer exited. As Jess switched off the engine, her hand trembled. The air was heavy with apprehension as the girls sat in silence. With an inscrutable look, the cop walked up. His words, "I need to check your car," arrived. Jess nodded, too scared to protest. There have been reports of stolen property in the area. The officer circled the car, flashing his flashlight into the windows, when all of a sudden another set of headlights arrived, bouncing down the dirt road. 2 men with shotguns slung over their shoulders stepped out of a pickup truck that pulled into the clearing. Jess felt a wave of panic as she looked at her friends, whose faces were white with fear. The officer spoke softly as he walked back to the girls after speaking to the men. "I need one of you to come with me," he said, looking at Maya, who backed away and shook her head. "Why? What did we do?" The officer stated, "It's just a few questions with this. It's just a few questions with this. We want to stay together." The officer's face darkened. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Jess came forward, her voice trembling. The tone hardened. "You'll be safe. Jess's mind raced as the shotgun-wielding guys approached, their faces obscured by shadows. She recalled every caution her parents had ever told her, every tale she had written off as insanity, and she seized the officer's jaw tensed, and for a second Jess thought he might push the matter. But then he looked at the men, and something passed between them, a non-verbal discussion. "We're not going anywhere," she replied, drawing herself back with her hand. "All right," the officer said, standing back with a sigh. "Get in your car and go. But there will be repercussions if I see you out here once more." Without waiting for him to reconsider, Jess pushed her pals into the car while fumbling with the keys. She saw the men watching them go, their faces cold and expressionless, in the rearview mirror as the engine roared to life, and she sped out of the clearing, gravel spraying behind them. They drove 4 miles, not daring to stop, not daring to speak, and when they finally came to the main road, Jess pulled over, her hands the girls gathered around, sobbing and trembling, the adrenaline gradually fading, and they contacted the police, but the dispatcher appeared doubtful. "Are you sure it was a real officer? No patrols have been in that area?" she inquired. "This evening," the dispatcher promised to send someone to investigate, but Jess could see she didn't believe them. They spent the remainder of the night in a brilliantly lighted gas station, too terrified to sleep. "The men with the shotguns, the cruiser, the badge," Jess said, her blood running cold. "The experience changed them." Maya suffered from nightmares and woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps outside her, and Jess became cautious and distrustful of authority. They attempted to retrace their route in the morning, but the dirt road had vanished, engulfed by the cornfields, and there was no sign of the barn or tire tracks to prove what had happened. Glass. The police rejected their account, blaming it on stress and fatigue, but Jess knew what she'd witnessed. Leah and Hannah withdrew, their friendship strained by the trauma they'd shared, and they never learned who the officer was or what he and the men had planned. The officer's icy gaze, his menacing tone, and the feeling that they had been inches away from something truly malevolent. Years later, Jess continued to steer clear of rural roads and recoiled at the sight of flashing lights in her mirror. She shared her story with anyone who would listen, cautioning them to follow their gut feelings and never follow a stranger, regardless of their uniform. The open road is a place of freedom, but it's also a place where danger can take on any form, including the face of the law. If you've ever had the tingling feeling that something isn't right, or if you've ever wondered why someone in a position of authority is acting the way they are, you know how easily trust can turn to fear. If you have a similar story, or if you have ever been threatened by someone you thought you could trust, please share it in the comments section below. Your experience may be the reminder someone else needs to stay safe. Remember Jess and her friends when you are pulled over on a lonely road. Stay together, stay vigilant, never let your guard down. For more true stories that will keep you on guard, be sure to subscribe to the Verified Fierce Horror Stories channel. Keep in mind that sometimes the most terrifying threats are those that wear badges. Let's move on to our 6th story, a true account that will make you wonder what haunts the roads we've built in the past. Known to the locals as Old Millersfield, the small town was isolated for decades, nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, with only a 2-lane road that wound through the countryside as its only link to the outside world. The road was notorious for its steep drop-offs, sharp bends, and the way it seemed to vanish into fog on humid summer nights. Everyone knew someone who had lost control on the curves of Millersfield Road. For years, the town council pushed for a safer, straighter bypass, a modern highway that would avoid the town and make travel easier for everyone. The new road cut straight through the hills, avoiding the abandoned farmsteads and old mines that dot the landscape. When the bypass finally opened, it was celebrated as a triumph of progress. It was smooth as glass, spacious, and well lit. Inquisitive residents anxious to test the new route caused considerable traffic during the first week, but the stories started almost quickly. It all began late one night when a truck driver called Dave was transporting a cargo of lumber. The first person to report spotting something odd was him. A bunch of kids in vintage attire were standing by the side of the road, thinking they might be lost or in trouble. Dave halted. However, when he approached, the kids disappeared, vanishing into thin air. It was simply exhaustion, an illusion of the headlights on the fog, he told himself. But he was plagued by the vision for days. A week later, Carla, a young woman, was driving home after her hospital shift. She was worn out and distracted when she noticed a figure cross the road in front of her. With her heart racing, she slammed on the brakes, but nothing was there. She sat trembling for a while. Before moving on, she discovered a small muddy handprint on her windshield the following morning. The tales grew. Children were playing in the median, and drivers said they could hear their laughing resonating through the night. Others claimed to have seen a monk standing still at the edge of the woods, his face obscured by shadows, wearing a ragged brown robe. Some claimed to have seen whole families strolling hand in hand along the shoulder, men wearing little caps, and ladies wearing long skirts. Though the specifics changed, the fear remained constant, an unexplainable feeling of impending doom, as though the past were seeping into the present. Initially, the town disregarded the tales as superstition. Then the mishap started. To avoid phantom children, cars swerved, trucks on dry pavement jackknifed, drivers lost control without any explanation. The bypass gained a reputation as a poor road and a location where odd things occurred, and many died needlessly. Nothing was discovered during the police investigation. No footprints, no proof, no justification. It was Mrs. Abernathy, the local historian, who originally proposed a link to the old mines. She clarified that the Millersfield mine, where scores of children perished in a collapse over a century ago, was immediately on top of the bypass's construction site. The mine had been neglected and sealed. However, the memory persisted in the communal memory of the town. According to Mrs. Abernathy, the children's souls were trapped beneath the road and were pleading with the living for assistance. The stories continued despite the skepticism. Teenagers once challenged one another to walk the bypass at midnight. They filmed themselves for social media while joking and laughing. However, the laughter stopped as they got to the halfway point. The road was engulfed by a dense fog. As the temperature dropped, the teenagers heard quiet, calling their names and begging. A little, cold hand slipped into the palm of one girl's hand. She dropped her phone and yelled. They discovered muddy footsteps running up to the doors of their automobile as they dashed back there. After going viral, the video attracted thrill seekers and ghost hunters from all around the world. Some said they could record voices on video or spheres of light hovering over the street. Others fled in fear and vowed never to come back. Concerned about the effect on tourism, the town attempted to minimize the stories, but the legend just got stronger. The bypass turned to become a cause of worrying for Millersfield residents. Children were cautioned by their parents. Avoid walking close to the road after dark. Despite the risks, truckers tended to steer clear of it whenever possible, favoring the ancient, tortuous road. The accidents persisted, despite the police stepping up patrols. Mr. Reynolds, a local educator, was traveling home one evening following a late meeting. He was a man who is not prone to fantasy. However, he suddenly felt cold as he got closer to the bypass. The headlights flickered and the radio crackled with static. He noticed a bunch of kids seated in the back seat, their eyes sorrowful and big, in the rear-view mirror. With his heart pounding, he slammed on the brakes, but as he turned, the vehicle was vacant. In a few days, he drove home, still feeling as though he had received a warning. Mr. Reynolds was aware of what he had witnessed, but his wife insisted that he consult a doctor. He started looking into the mine catastrophe and came across old newspaper stories and faded photos. He discovered that the names and graves of the children who perished had never been appropriately remembered. Perhaps that was the reason their spirits stayed, caught between worlds, he thought. Motivated by a sense of duty and guilt, Mr. Reynolds planned a memorial service near the location of the former mine. He invited everyone in the town, and they all lit candles, laid flowers, and recited the names of the deceased children out loud. For the first time in several months, there were no accidents on the bypass that evening. The road seemed less stifling and the air felt lighter, but the tranquility was fleeting. After several weeks, the sightings went back to work. Drivers claimed to have spotted the monk once more, standing at the wood's edge with his hood over his face. Some claimed that he was a guardian, keeping an eye on the kids' souls. Others said he was a sign that the route would never be secure. The state rejected the town council's proposal to close the bypass. The old route was too hazardous to reopen, and too much money had been spent. Rather, they erected warning signs, increased the number of lights, and advised cars to use caution. For those who had witnessed the spirits, however, the terror persisted. It was a transformative experience. The nurse, Carla, developed an obsession with the idea of assisting the spirits in finding tranquility. Every week, she came to the location, muttering prayers into the wind while leaving toys and flowers. Haunted by the sight of the children's faces, truck driver Dave refused to drive at night. The teens who recorded the widely shared video experienced nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of laughter and the sensation of tiny hands pulling at their bed linens. The haunted bypass legend was incorporated into a tale that has been passed down from one generation to the next about Millersfield's identity. Some viewed it as a hoax, a means of amusing tourists and frightening newcomers. Others saw it as a warning, a reminder that the earth remembers what we strive to forget, and that the past is never really buried. The accidents persisted over the years. Some attributed this to the layout of the road. The weather was blamed by others. The truth, however, was known to those who had witnessed the spirits, the ghosts of the monk, the children, and the families that perished in the mines. They remained buried beneath the asphalt, pleading for assistance from the living. Keep an eye out for the shadows at the edge of your headlights if you ever find yourself driving the Millersfield bypass late at night. Pay attention to the voices whispering in the breeze and the sound of laughter. Additionally, don't stop if you notice a child standing by the side of the road. Don't turn around. Simply drive and hope that you can move on in peace with the past. Leave a comment below if you have a similar experience, or if you have ever come across something while traveling that you are unable to explain. Someone else may use your experience as a caution to keep safe. For more factual stories that will keep you on your toes, don't forget to subscribe to the Verified Fears Horror Stories channel. Be careful out there and keep in mind that often the things we construct on top of the ruins of the past are the most terrifying. I may continue to build on this base to meet your precise word count and style preferences if you would like this story to be expanded with even more psychological depth, conversation, or additional views. Now let's move on to our seventh tale, an honest story that will cause you to re-evaluate trust itself and the awful truth of being totally dependent on another person while traveling the open road. Olivia had been fiercely independent for as long as she could remember. She was the type of person who loved the freedom of traveling alone, who thrived on adventure, and who thought that despite all its risks, the world was generally a good place to be. During her previous cross-country drives, she discovered new places in America, new stories, and new people to fall in love. The summer following her graduation from college, she made the decision to take one final road trip before starting her first real job. The trip took her from her childhood home in Vermont to San Diego, where her new life was waiting for her. Naturally, her parents were concerned, but Olivia comforted them with her typical assurance. She had a phone full of information, a well-planned itinerary, and a dependable car. Contacts for emergencies. She pledged not to pick up strangers and to check in each night. Feeling the typical excitement of the unknown ahead, she waved and hugged before heading out into the sunlight. The initial days fulfilled all of her expectations. She swerved across the verdant New England hills, paused in Connecticut for lobster rolls, and watched the New York City skyline fade away in her rearview mirror. She delighted at the Midwest's boundless fields, slept at an oddball bed and breakfast in Ohio, and camped in state parks. As her confidence increased with each mile, she snapped pictures at every location and sent them to her parents and friends. The drive seemed familiar by the time she arrived in the Kansas plains, and the concerns her parents had forced upon her were unneeded and far away. It was in the middle of things started to go apart between Salina and Dodge City. The monotony of the highway and the soft sway of the automobile had soothed Olivia as she drove 4 hours. She was anticipating a nice lunch and a cozy bed in the next town as the sun was sinking, illuminating the sky with orange and purple hues. With her stomach growling with anticipation, she chose to continue after passing a sign for a rest place 10 miles ahead. With the fields on either side extending to the horizon, the road was deserted, and Olivia experienced a glimmer of anxiety for the first time during the trip. She dismissed it as exhaustion turned up the radio and continued. Olivia spotted a car parked on the shoulder with flashing warning lights as she got closer to the rest area. Beside it, a man was standing and waving his arms, a worried expression on his face. Olivia hesitated, remembering the cautions from her parents, but she couldn't help but feel sympathy for the man because he appeared to be in a difficult situation. As she drew up next to him, she slowed and rolled down her window. She called and said, "Are you okay?" While holding her separation, the man, who was in his mid-30s, was clean-shaven, wearing trousers and a faded t-shirt. He said that his phone was dead and his car had broken down. He asked her if she could drive him a few miles up the highway to the next town. Olivia paused, staring at the deserted road in behind of her. The man appeared somewhat innocuous, and she didn't want to abandon him. She unlocked the passenger door and motioned for him to enter. Defying her better judgment, he introduced himself as Tom and thanked her profusely. He was gregarious, talkative, and appeared sincere in his appreciation of the assistance. As they traveled, Olivia unwinded while hearing about his childhood in Kansas and his upcoming trip, family in Colorado. However, when they got to the rest area, Tom asked if she could wait while he went to the bathroom. Olivia accepted as she parked and looked at her phone's messages. Tom came back a few minutes later, but his attitude had altered. His eyes darted uneasily over the lot, and he was silent. Olivia was a little uneasy, but before she could react, Tom sprang forward, grabbed her arm, and pulled her out of the car. She kicked and clawed as she yelled, but Tom was stronger. Before she could get out, he pushed her into his car's trunk and slammed the lid shut. Olivia's shouts were muffled by the thick metal she hammered on the inside of the trunk. Panicking, her phone was still in the front seat of her car when she scrambled for it. The trunk smelled of old carpet and oil, and it was hot and dark. She made an effort to recall every escape from a trunk she had ever read about. Seek out the emergency release. Turn on the rear lights. Remain composed. Her fingertips brushed a rusty tire iron and the tangled jumble of jumper cables as she searched around in the dark, her heart pounding. No emergency release was made. Under her, the engine rumbled as the automobile started. Olivia sensed the car lurching ahead, the movement confusing. Her thoughts was muddled by anxiety, but she made an effort to keep track of the curves, stops, and sounds outside. As the car drove along the highway, away from the security of the rest area and into the unknown, she sobbed, her body trembling with fear. In the darkness, time became meaningless. Olivia slipped into and out of consciousness, her thoughts reliving all of her mistakes and the warnings she had disregarded. She reflected about the life she had been so excited to begin, her parents, and her friends. She pondered whether anyone would come looking for her or notice that she was absent. She made an effort to concentrate and to keep in mind every detail that could aid in her escape. But the terror was too great. The automobile eventually slowed and came to a stop. Outside, Olivia heard voices. The trunk muffled the voices of Tom and another man. She listened with difficulty, picking up bits of discussion. The trunk contains her. Nobody noticed. We'll bring her back to the original location. We'll bring her back to the original location. When she realized she was up against not one, but two captors, her blood ran cold. She was blinded by the intense brilliance of a flashlight when the trunk opened. She was taken from the trunk by Tom and the other man, a stout bearded man with icy eyes, who bound her hands with duct tape. They crammed her between them, pushed her into the back seat, and drove for what seemed like hours. Olivia made an effort to commit the path, but the roads were winding and twisting, and the sights were strange. They came to a halt at a deserted farmhouse, its yard overrun with weeds, and its windows boarded up. After dragging her inside, the men locked her in a tiny room without a window. As Olivia tested the door, the walls, and the floorboards in an attempt to find a way out, her thoughts were racing. She discovered nothing but dust and splinters. Days flew by in a haze of fatigue and terror. Though they didn't say much, the men brought her food and water. Outside her door, she could hear their voices rising and falling as they argued. She caught tidbits of their schemes. Something about waiting for the proper moment, ransom, or escape. Olivia held on to hope, assuring herself that she would find a way out and that someone would come looking for her. Olivia heard a slight scraping noise coming from the wall behind her one evening while the men were fighting in the kitchen. She listened while pressing her ear against the plaster. The noise increased and then subsided. A barely heard murmur came through the wall. "Are you all right?" Olivia felt her heart leap. She returned the whisper, describing her predicament. Another captive, a teenage girl named Mia, had the quiet, tremulous voice. A few weeks prior, she had been abducted from a nearby town's bus station. She had been imprisoned by the men, who had given her enough food to keep her alive. Mia had lost hope of being saved, but Olivia's presence had given her newfound resolve. They planned their escape together. Olivia used a piece of broken glass to pry up a loose floorboard. She found a corroded nail underneath it, which she used to pick at her door's lock. After days of meticulous labor, the lock finally gave way. After the men had gone to sleep, Olivia slipped into Mia's chamber and released her from her restraints. They passed through the home in silence, hearts racing, each floorboard creak threatening to reveal them. In the kitchen, they discovered a dead phone. The windows were barred, and the front entrance was bolted. They looked for another way out in desperation, finding a cellar door that opened into the backyard at last. They ran across the overgrown yard and into the woods beyond, disappearing into the darkness. Branches tore at their clothing as they staggered through the dark until they came to a road. With a sigh of relief, Olivia signaled down a passing vehicle. Tom and his accomplice were arrested by the police when they arrived in a matter of minutes. After being brought to the hospital, Olivia and Mia were reunited with their loved ones. Even though the experience had only lasted a week, it seemed to go on forever. Olivia was irrevocably altered by the experience. She started to be careful and suspicious of people, and she kept having nightmares about the trunk and the dark. She battled guilt. Why had she halted? Why hadn't she followed her intuition? However, she also found strength in the fact that she had survived, in the relationship she had developed with Mia, and in the fact that she had resisted and managed to get away. Olivia cautioned anybody who would listen to her story to never take safety for granted, to follow their gut feelings, and to exercise caution when driving. She started advocating for people who were missing, attempting to assist those who had been abducted, misplaced, or forgotten. The world can swiftly turn hazardous if you've ever trusted a stranger and ignored that glimmer of discomfort. There is freedom on the open road. However, it's also a location where evil can go undetected. Consequently, the next time you witness someone stuck on the side of the road, keep in mind, Olivia, follow your gut, remain vigilant, and never let your guard down. If you've ever escaped a potentially dangerous situation, please share your tale in the comments section below. Someone else may use your experience as a caution to keep safe. For more factual stories that will keep you on your toes, don't forget to subscribe to the Verified Fears Horror Stories channel. Now let's move on to the 9th story. A real story that will show you that sometimes the most terrible threats on the road are mechanical rather than supernatural or human, and the gradual, unrelenting realization that your existence is dependent on a machine that is failing you when you are most alone can cause that terror to intensify. As long as he was able, Adam had loved to drive, you recall. He cherished the sensation of control, the way the outside world merged with his windows, and the sense of opportunity that accompanied each new highway segment. He was the type of person who offered to drive on all road trips, who took delight in knowing the sound of every hum and rattle beneath the hood, and who kept his car clean and well maintained. He had traveled up the steep mountain routes of British Columbia, across the boundless prairies of Saskatchewan, and through snowstorms in Alberta. He believed he was aware of the dangers on the road. Inclement weather, careless traffic, and the sporadic near-miss encounters with wildlife. However, nothing had prepared him for the night he was left stranded between Longview and Sparwood, with no one 4 miles in any direction, and a dying automobile beneath him. It began as an ordinary journey. Adam had spent a long weekend hiking and spending up with his sister in Fernie. Late on a Sunday afternoon, he left for home. The sky was cloudy. The danger of rain hung thick in the air. Adam, however, wasn't concerned. He was familiar with the path. Small communities and the occasional gas station were scattered along the highway's twisting path into the mountains. After checking his oil and filling up his tank, he started driving while his favorite music played on the speakers. The first hour went by without any problems. Adam experienced the comfortable tranquility that comes with driving alone, since the road was deserted and the surroundings were breathtaking. But Adam saw something odd as the hills began to darken. Normally quick and smooth, the engine started to stutter. When he first touched the accelerator, there was just a minor lag, which he attributed to either filthy filters or bad gas. However, the issue worsened as the miles passed. On the hills, the car started to lose power, the engine stuttering and coughing, as though it was having trouble breathing. Adam scowled when looking at the dashboard. No clear symptoms of problem. No warning lights. He switched off the music and listened carefully to the noises emanating from beneath the hood. The automobile began to stammer more and more, jerking and trembling every mile. Adam felt his heart pounding. He was no mobile coverage, no one to call for assistance, and miles from the closest town. Hoping for a clear solution, he pulled over, opened the hood, and looked into the engine bay. Everything appeared to be typical. No leaks, no smoke, nothing strange. After tightening the gas cap and checking the oil once more, he attempted to start the vehicle. Reluctantly, the engine turned over and caught, but the idle was harsh. The entire car vibrates in a sickening pattern. Adam resumed his drive, moving carefully and paying close attention to every noise and vibration. Fearing that the engine would stall as he allowed it to fall below 2000 rpm, he maintained the revs high. The trees pressed in on each side of the road, which extended in a lonesome ribbon, and the sky grew darker by the second. He prayed for the lights of a town, a petrol station, or some other indication of civilization each time he topped a hill. However, the road was still deserted. The only companions are the sporadic deer that peer out from the darkness. Adam felt a chilling knot of terror slowly growing. He was aware that he would be in serious trouble if the automobile died out here. Rain was predicted, and the temperature was decreasing. He couldn't contact for assistance because he didn't have cell service. Furthermore, the closest town was at least 50 kilometers away. He made an effort to maintain his composure, keeping his eyes on the road and hoping the automobile would continue. He coaxed the engine by speaking to it, along, vowing to mend it, to take better care of it, and to never take it for granted again. The situation became more dire as the night drew on. The automobile was moaning and lurching with each mile, the engine barely working. Adam's eyes darted from the road to the dashboard, monitoring the temperature gauge, the oil pressure, and the gasoline level, while his hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. He shut off everything but he tried to save as much energy as possible by turning off the radio, the air conditioner, and even the headlights, when he was certain that no one else was around. It began as a drizzle and intensified into a heavy deluge. Water was smeared across the windshield as the wipers fought to keep up. The vision deteriorated and the road became slippery. Fearing that any abrupt movement might permanently destroy the engine, Adam slowed to a crawl. He went by a sign, 60 kilometers in the long view. It might have easily been 100. He clenched his teeth and concentrated on the engine's rhythm and the white lines, on the wish that he would be able to go a bit further. The hours passed slowly. Adam's world shrank to the circle of light from his headlights and the constant sound of the rain, and he lost all concept of time. He started having hallucinations, in which he saw faces in the trees and objects in the shadows. He pictured the vehicle dying. I pictured myself lost in the forest, wandering for kilometers in the dark, soaked to the bone. He recalled the tales he had heard. People who went missing on desolate highways and were discovered cold or worse days later. He made an effort to ignore the ideas and concentrate on the work at hand. But the worrying was there all the time, eating away at the corners of his thoughts. Adam was certain it was over when the engine stuttered so horribly, the dashboard flickered and the lights dimmed as the automobile drew to a crawl. With his heart thumping, he stopped and sat in the dark while listening to the rain drum on the rooftop. He considered leaving and attempting to signal a passing vehicle, automobile, but he was aware that the likelihood was low. The awareness that he was completely alone hit him like a kick to the belly. Whispering a prayer, he tried the ignition once more. After coughing, the engine caught, running rough. With every nerve on edge, Adam pushed himself back onto the road and drove even more slowly. He marked each kilometer as a minor triumph as he tallied them. 30, 40, 50 to go. The rain continued to fall. There was always darkness. Adam's relief was tempered by anxiety and fatigue as he approached Longview. His body was trembling, his head was numb, and he was on adrenaline. The engine was now vibrating with each full spin, and the automobile was making a horrible grinding noise. He could sense the heat rising from the flooring and smell burning oil. He had no other option, even though he knew he was pushing the automobile too far. After what seemed like an age, Adam finally caught a glimpse of Longview's lights glimmering in the rain. He sobbed in relief, finding it hard to believe he had arrived. With a final trembling gasp, the engine died and he coasted into the first petrol station he spotted. He spent a considerable amount of time sitting in the car with his head resting on the steering wheel and tears running down his cheeks. The attendant knocked on the window and emerged. Adam rolled it down and described what had happened, his voice trembling. After listening and giving a sympathetic nod, the attendant dialed a tow truck. Adam observed his vehicle being hoisted onto the flatbed, experiencing an odd mixture of sadness and thankfulness. The incident had altered him, but he had survived. Unable to sleep, he collapsed into the bed after checking into a motel. Every time he closed his eyes, the road was deserted. The sound of the motor dying could be heard, and a chilling shiver of anxiety ran down his spine. He informed his parents and sister over the phone that he was safe, but he was unable to bring himself to reveal to them how near catastrophe he had been. Adam's suspicions were confirmed by the mechanic the next day. He might have been trapped in the middle of nowhere if the engine hadn't been shot. He took the bus the rest of the way home, selling the car for scrap. That section of road was never driven by him again. Adam was plagued by the encounter for years. When it came to car maintenance, he became extremely watchful, never letting the petrol tank go below half, and never dismissing an odd noise or vibration. The realization that your destiny is in the hands of a machine that doesn't care whether you live or die made him fear driving at night, being by himself on the road, and the slow, creeping dread that follows. He cautioned everyone who listened to his story to take care of their vehicles, to be mindful of the risks on the road, and to never take safety for granted. He was aware that most people would never comprehend the horror of that night, how the blackness appeared to engulf them, stifling and total, and how the panic increased with each mile. Have you ever found yourself stranded on a desolate road? Confidence can swiftly morph to worrying if you've ever experienced the icy shiver of anxiety in your gut as your car sputters and dies. There is freedom on the open road. However, it's also a location where you're completely alone, where assistance is far away, and where the only thing separating you from catastrophe is a machine that may break down at any time. Therefore, keep Adam in mind the next time when we're a lengthy journey. Make sure your car is in good condition, plan your route, and never undervalue the risks involved. Because sometimes the monsters you can't see are the most terrifying. They are the ones concealed beneath the hood, anticipating the ideal opportunity. If you've ever survived a technical nightmare while driving, please share your tale in the comments section below. Someone else may use your experience as a caution to keep safe. For more factual stories that will keep you on your toes, don't forget to subscribe to the Verified Fears Horror Stories channel. Be careful out there and keep in mind that often, the most terrible threats are the ones you don't anticipate. Now let's move on to our 9th tale. This is a genuine story that will show you that sometimes the most terrible threats on the road are not supernatural or human, but rather the unstoppable might of nature, and the speed at which a family vacation can devolve into a life or death struggle. Road excursions were a summertime ritual for the Miller family. They would cram sleeping bags, fishing poles, and enough snacks to feed an army into their ancient Chevy Suburban and go out for adventure every year as soon as school let out. For the children, Jenna, 15, Max, 12, and Sophie, 8, it was the high point of the year, an opportunity to go away from home's routines and immerse oneself in the limitless opportunities of the road. These travels were also treasured by their parents, Tom and Linda, who saw them as a means of re-establishing family ties and making lifelong memories. It was the same in the summer of 2007. From their home in Topeka, Kansas, they intended to go by car to a secluded lake in Oklahoma, where Tom's brother owned a rustic cottage. They would pass through the center of Tornado Alley on the way. Tom wasn't concerned, though. Having been raised in the Midwest, he took great satisfaction in his ability to predict the weather and protect his family. It was a sunny June morning when they left. The sky is a flawless blue, the fresh wheat glistening in the fields. In the rear seat, the children engaged in games. Out of habit, Tom maintained one eye on the horizon, looking for storm clouds, while Linda read aloud from a worn guidebook. A haze of tiny towns, wayside eateries, and unending highways characterized the first day. They visited Witcher 4 ice cream, snapped pictures at the biggest ball of twine in the world, and got to the cottage just as the sun was going down. The air was heavy with the aroma of wild flowers and pine, and the lake was serene. Over the next 2 days, their laughter reverberated across the pond as they fished, swam, and explored the woods. They roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories while sitting by the fire at night. The shadows beyond their sphere of illumination, profound and unbreakable. The weather changed on the 3rd day. The sky turned a weird, sickly green that Tom knew all too well, and the air became heavy. He listened to the prediction on the radio. Tornadoes and severe thunderstorms are approaching from the west. Tom resisted Linda's suggestion that they pack up and leave early for home. He didn't want to shorten the journey because the storms were still hours away. Besides, he thought, if things went awful, they could always pull over. As the afternoon wore on, the clouds grew heavier and piled up like battered mountains on the horizon. The cabin's windows rattled as the wind increased, delivering ripples on the water. Tom made the decision to leave. They hurriedly packed, throwing their belongings into the Suburban and making one final check of the weather. A tornado watch was issued for the entire area, according to the radio. But if they left right away, Tom was sure they could outrun the storm. The atmosphere in the car was strained before they left, but optimistic. Tom's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he kept the radio set to the weather station. Linda used diversions and stories to divert the children's attention in an effort to keep them quiet. However, even Max and Jenna could hear their parents' nervousness in their slowed to a crawl. The meadows were illuminated by glaring, unearthly light as lightning struck. Static crackled on the radio. The weatherman's voice was hardly audible. Warning of a tornado. Get behind shelter right away. Tom's heart was racing. The fields were deserted as he looked along the side of the road for a spot to stop. The farm homes are far away and gloomy. Trees bent nearly double on the road ahead, which was a tunnel of wind and rain. Tom looked through the glass, his stomach sinking as he realized what Linda meant when she said, "There's something up ahead, on the highway." A line of cars came to a stop, their hazard lights flickering in the darkness. In order to speak with the motorist ahead, he rolled down his window and pulled over behind them. The man's voice was trembling, and his face was pale. "A tornado is headed our way. We are unable to proceed. The downed trees blocked the roads. We must locate somewhere to stay." Tom's thoughts were racing as he gazed about. No ditch was deep enough to provide protection, and there was no overpass. The sole choice was a little tree forest about 50 yards from the road. In an instant, he decided, "Now everyone is out." The wind almost knocked the family off their feet as they clambered out of the automobile. As they fled for the trees, Jenna clung to her mother's hand. Linda took Max, and Tom grabbed Sophie. They were soaked to the bone by the rain, which stung their faces like needles. The wind's roar intensified. There was a freight train descending on them. They arrived at the grove and huddled close to the biggest tree. In an attempt to protect his family from the flying debris, Tom put his arms around them. The sound of glass breaking and wood splintering filled the air. The ground trembled. As a branch, Jenna shouted. She missed her by centimeters as he whipped past her head. The tornado struck with an incomprehensible force. Their clothing, hair, and breath were all ripped away by the wind. Branches and debris littered the ground as the trees cracked and bowed. Tom struggled to hold on, his head racing, his muscles burning, occupied by a single thought: protect them. Although it was only minutes, it felt like hours. The boom subsided to a distant rumbling as the wind started to fade. The air became unexpectedly silent when the rain slackened. Blinking against the blood and filth on his cheeks, Tom opened his eyes. His family was unharmed, albeit rattled. They staggered back toward the street. In the dim light, the destruction was shown. Trees were uprooted, cars were overturned, and the electricity lines were brought down. The Suburban was gone, carried away by the storm. Other families emerged from the ruins, their faces pallid and shocked. The ensuing hours were a haze of uncertainty and mayhem. When emergency personnel came, they combed through the wreckage in an effort to find survivors. After being brought to a neighboring shelter, the Millers cuddled together, thankful for their survival. They discovered that the tornado, which was an EF4 and one of the strongest in recent memory, left miles of devastation in its wake. The family found it difficult to comprehend what had transpired in the days that followed. The children experienced nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of rain and wind. Tom held himself responsible for placing his family in risk by delaying his departure. Although Linda made an effort to comfort him, the storm's memories still plagued her. Their sense of security was shattered as they returned home, though their summer vacation was cut short. They were altered by the encounter, leaving both apparent and invisible scars. They grew more watchful, more appreciative of nature's strength, and more appreciative of just being together. Once fearless, Jenna became deeply afraid of storms. Max read as much as he could about tornadoes and how to withstand them, since he grew fixated on weather patterns. The youngest, Sophie, sketched images of the storm, swirling winds and dark clouds. Her family gathered together, under a tree together. Although they both battled the trauma, Tom and Linda tried their hardest to aid in their kids' recovery. Tom shared his experience with others who had experienced the same dread by going to support groups for survivors. Linda helped people who had lost everything in the hurricane by volunteering at the local Red Cross in their community. The Miller's story served as a warning, a reminder of how easily things may change in life and how flimsy safety is. They urged others to appreciate the force of nature and to never take the road for granted as they shared their story with anyone who would listen. If you've ever been on the open road during a storm, confidence can swiftly give way to fear. If you have ever experienced the unbridled, primitive fear of nature, there is freedom on the road. However, it's also a location where you're powerless over uncontrollable forces. Thus, keep the Millers in mind the next time you spot storm clouds building in the distance. Have faith in your intuition, look for cover, and never undervalue the wind's strength. If you've ever survived a natural disaster while traveling, please share your tale in the comments section below. Someone else may use your experience as a caution to keep safe. For more factual stories that will keep you on your toes, don't forget to subscribe to the Verified Fears Horror Stories channel. Be careful out there, and keep in mind that sometimes the threats you can't escape are the most terrible. Now let's move on to the 10th story. A real story that will cause you to wonder about what you see in the dark and how a single, brief meeting on the highway may leave a lasting impression. Jack had driven a semi for the majority of his adult life, traveling the long highways that cut across the Midwest of the United States. During those long, lonely hauls, he was accustomed to the loneliness of the open road, the boundless horizons, and the way the world seemed to shrink to the brightness of his headlights. The familiar crackling of the late-night radio, the steady hum of the engine, and the dependable rhythm of the mile markers had always given him a sense of security. Other drivers had told him many tales of eerie sights, phantom hitchhikers, enigmatic lights, and strange individuals they had seen while driving. Caught a glimpse in the fog. However, Jack was a pragmatic individual who was not much swayed by otherworldly stories, until he saw something one fall night that would haunt him for years to come. Jack was transporting a shipment from Kansas City to Denver in late October. The fields on either side of the roadway already been bared by the harvest. The air was clear, and with the exception of a small moon, the sky was clear. In an attempt to have a good time through the night, Jack had left the city after sunset. As the miles passed, he found himself humming along to the radio, drinking coffee, and slipping into the comfortable calm of night driving on the nearly empty highway. At around midnight, Jack came to an old overpass that he had traversed innumerable times. He noticed a man standing still at the railing as his headlights swept up the embankment. Just a woman, silhouetted against the darkness. Her hair was loose and blew gently in the breeze, and she wore a long, dark coat. Jack's initial response was worrying. Was she stuck somewhere? Was there someone she was waiting for? He looked up for a better view and slowed as he went under the bridge. Their eyes locked for a moment, her face white in the moonlight, her gaze steady and far away. Jack experienced an unexplained chill, a sensation of melancholy and uneasiness, half expecting to see her wave or move. He checked his mirrors as he continued driving, but she stayed motionless, watching the road below. She was probably just a traveler looking for a ride, or maybe someone from a nearby farm, Jack told himself as he attempted to get rid of the weird feeling. However, he couldn't stop thinking about her as the night went on. With the darkness encroaching on all sides, the road ahead appeared more deserted than usual. About an hour later, he was shocked to see her again as he passed another overpass. The same posture, the same coat, the same aloof gaze. Jack felt his heart pounding this time. Given that he hadn't seen any cars go by or any side roads that would have enabled her to arrive there before him, he was certain she couldn't have made it there before him. Jack was feeling tense. Right now, he continued to scan the roadside, looking in his mirrors, half expecting to see her again. Every overpass became a source of fear, despite his best efforts to concentrate on the drive. Sometimes they were empty, but sometimes impossibly. He would always see her in the same location, observing. It made less sense the more he tried to explain what he was seeing. After too many hours on the road, he questioned whether he was simply tired or if his mind was deceiving him. Jack was rattled and tired by the time the first rays of dawn appeared on the horizon. He entered a truck stop, His hands shaking, he poured himself a cup of coffee on the outskirts of a little town. The vision of the woman on the overpass would not go away, despite his best efforts to talk himself out of his panic. He asked a few other drivers if they had ever noticed anything odd when driving along that particular section of the highway. "You saw her, too, didn't you?" said one of them, a weathered-faced elderly man. After he nodded slowly, he clarified that other cars had reported seeing a woman on the overpasses along that route over the years, but she was always by herself and always at night. Some thought she had anything to do with a story from decades ago, a local woman who waited for someone who never came back for years. Her tale has been incorporated into regional folklore. Others believed that she was only a figure who appeared to those who were traveling alone and represented sadness or longing. Jack had an obsession with figuring out why. He combed through internet forums, looked for old newspaper stories, and listened to every trucker rumor he could find. Although the stories differed, the details were consistently uncannily alike. Always at night, always on the overpass, a single woman. Her presence left drivers feeling sad or uneasy for a while. Nobody was certain of her identity or the reason behind her appearance. However, the experiences always had an impact. Even after Jack completed his after, making the delivery and going home, he was plagued by the memories of that evening. In order to avoid the overpasses, he started taking longer routes and avoiding that section of the roadway. He became more watchful and conscious of the odd and inexplicable things that might occur while driving. He shared his experience with other drivers, advising them to follow their gut feelings and never dismiss a bad sensation. If you know how easily the familiar may become weird, if you've ever traveled alone at night and caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of your eye that you couldn't explain, there is freedom on the open road. The lost and lonely may still be there, waiting for someone to see them, but it's also a place where the past remains. Thus, keep in mind, Jack, the next time you spot someone standing on an overpass, follow your gut, remain vigilant, and never, ever turn around. Leave a comment below if you have a similar experience, or if you have ever come across something on the road that you are unable to explain. Someone else may use your experience as a caution to keep safe. For more factual stories that will keep you on your toes, don't forget to subscribe to the Verified Fears Horror Stories channel. Be careful out there, and keep in mind that the things that are never completely understood might occasionally be the most eerie things you encounter while traveling. Let's go on to the 11th story, an honest story that will cause you to doubt the very people you were meant to trust while traveling. Additionally, how one moment of uncertainty mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. Natalie had been the responsible one in her friend group for as long as she could remember. Before departing on any trip, she was the one who made sure everyone had their phones charged and their seat belts fastened. Before life parted them, Natalie and her two closest friends, Claire and Marcus, made the decision to take a final road trip together that summer after graduating from college. From their home in upstate New York, they intended to drive all the way to the Grand Canyon, camping and hiking along the way as they traveled the picturesque route through the Midwest and the Rockies. 4 weeks, they had planned their trip, reserved campsites, and created playlists for each stop along the way. It was meant to be their last vacation together before adulthood set in, a celebration of their friendship. The first week was all they'd hoped for. They slept under the stars in national parks, stopped at oddball roadside eateries, and traveled through interminable cornfields and undulating hills. They took turns driving, trading stories, and singing along to the radio, the miles passing past in a flurry of laughter and anticipation. The drive felt familiar by the time they arrived in Colorado, and the concerns of the future seemed distant, away. Things started to go awry on a desolate stretch of highway between 2 small communities in western Colorado. In an attempt to reach the next town before nightfall, they had departed from their previous camping late in the afternoon. The mountains were painted in shades of purple and gold as the sun was sinking. Additionally, the road was deserted, save for the odd RV or pickup truck. Natalie was behind the wheel. As the last of the light went out of the sky, Marcus was fumbling with the GPS to find a shortcut to save them some time as Claire slept in the back seat. In the rearview mirror, Natalie saw headlights. At first, she thought nothing of it, just another automobile on the highway. However, the car continued to follow them for miles, never moving ahead of them or reversing course. Natalie tried to ignore her growing uneasiness. Perhaps they were simply traveling to the same town. The headlights flared a few minutes later. A beat skipped in Natalie's heart. The dark SUV behind them accelerated and drew up to keep up with them. The motorist motioned for them to stop as he pulled down his window. Uncertain of what to do, Natalie paused. There were no lights or markings on the SUV, but the driver was dressed in what appeared to be a police uniform. Marcus said tensely as he leaned forward, "Nat, I don't like this. Why would a police officer be out here in an unmarked vehicle?" Natalie's thoughts whirled. She had heard urban legends, if you will, involving phony police officers stopping individuals and robbing them or worse. However, she had also been brought up to respect authority and follow police orders. Her hands shaking, she slowed the car and pulled onto the shoulder. With its headlights blazing in the mirrors, the SUV came to a stop behind them. The driver exited and made their way slowly to their vehicle. The sun had long since set, but he was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark shades and a tactical vest on. He blinded them by shining his flashlight into the automobile. "License and registration," he stated in a tone devoid of feeling. Natalie's hands were shaking as she searched for her wallet. "Ask for his badge," Marcus murmured. "Real cops have to show you their badge." Natalie inhaled deeply while trying to sound composed. "Officer, may I see your badge?" The man's face remained unchanged. "Please provide me with your license and registration." There was a problem. Natalie had a gut feeling about it. Marcus shook his head, his eyes wide with terror, and she looked at him. With a pallid face, Claire sat up in the rear seat. With a trembling voice, Natalie said, "Officer, I'd like to call 911 to verify your identity." The man's mouth clenched. "Now get out of the car." Natalie's heart was racing. Something her father had told her came back to her. If a traffic stop ever makes you feel unsafe, you have the right to remain in your car with the doors locked and dial 911. With shaking fingers, she reached for her phone and dialed 911. Anger twisted the man's face. He banged his flashlight on the window. "Now open the door." Natalie had a strong urge to flee. She floored the throttle and slammed the car into gear. The automobile flew forward, fishtailing onto the highway when the tires caught after spinning on the gravel shoulder. With its headlights flashing, the SUV roared after them. In order to avoid losing the SUV in the tangle of back roads, Marcus yelled directions for Natalie, asking her to take the next exit. In the back seat, Claire wailed, her voice scarcely heard over the engine's noise. The SUV remained nearby, its driver weaving dangerously behind them while leaning on the horn. There was still a 911 connection on Natalie's phone. She begged for assistance by shouting their location into the receiver. In a calm voice, the dispatcher instructed her to continue driving and to avoid stopping at all costs by heading toward a busy area. The SUV was never more than a few car lengths behind them as they raced into the night. Natalie's breath came in rough gasps, and her hands were slippery with perspiration. The car bounced over gravel and potholes as she made a fast turn onto a side road, headlights glaring in the rearview mirror. The SUV trailed behind. A tiny town's lights were finally visible in the distance. The first gas station Natalie saw pulling into the well-lit lot was the one she targeted. After slowing down, the SUV turned and drove off, vanishing into the night. Natalie and her companions sat in the car, terrified as the cops approached. They talked about the outfit, the SUV, and the man. With solemn expressions, the cops listened. "You made the correct decision." According to one of them, there have been local reports of phony police officers, travelers being robbed by individuals impersonating law enforcement. Had you not followed your gut, things might have gone much differently. The remainder of the journey went by in a fog of fatigue and terror. Natalie only stopped in crowded, well-lit areas and stayed on well-traveled highways, avoiding driving at night. Every car that followed them was double-cheeked by her. The memories of the man's face, voice, and beating made her nervous. On the window, she was altered by the encounter. She grew more wary, more doubtful, and less inclined to blindly accept authority. She cautioned anyone who would listen to her story to always follow their gut feelings, never stop for an unmarked automobile, and always dial 911 as they felt endangered. Claire and Marcus suffered from nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night to the flash of headlights in the room and the sound of hammering glass. Dark, the trauma put their friendship to the test. The fact that they had survived something genuinely horrifying, however, had ultimately strengthened their bond and brought them closer. Trust can swiftly change to terror. If you've ever been pulled over on a lonely road and had a fleeting concern about the person in the uniform. Although freedom is a feature of the open road, danger can lurk there as well, where you should be most afraid of the individuals you are meant to trust. Thus, keep Natalie and her pals in mind the next time you notice flashing lights in your mirror. Have faith in your intuition. Remain vigilant and never let your guard down. Please share your tale in the comments section below if you have ever been intimidated by someone you believed you could trust. Someone else may use your experience as a caution to keep safe. For more factual stories that will keep you on your toes, don't forget to subscribe to the Verified Fierce Horror Stories channel. Be careful out there, and keep in mind that the threats that wear badges can occasionally be the most frightening. Let's wrap up this collection with a tale that demonstrates that sometimes the most terrifying dangers on the highway are the ones that are carefully thought out, lurking in unexpected locations, waiting for you. This is the real story of a lone traveler who discovered in the most terrifying way how easily a tranquil trip can devolve into a life-or-death struggle for survival. Daniel had been dreaming about the perfect road vacation by himself for years. Although he worked as a photographer, his true nature was that of a nomad, someone who felt most alive when the world was reduced to the sound of tires on asphalt and the constantly shifting scenery beyond his windshield, and who took comfort in the boundless horizon. Following 10 years of saving and after much preparation, he finally left his Seattle home with the goal of traveling all the way to the southern tip of Texas while documenting the undiscovered splendor of America's backroads. With his camera gear, a cooler full of munchies, and a well-worn atlas filled with locations he had always wanted to see, his car served as his haven. He was meticulous, cautious, and always trusted his gut, qualities that had protected him during years of traveling alone. However, nothing could have prepared him for what he would see on a desolate highway in New Mexico's wastes. Daniel's journey's initial days were everything he could have imagined. He traversed the snow-capped summits of the Rockies, drove through the foggy forests of Oregon, and explored the crimson canyons of Utah, his camera photographing ghost villages, wild horses, storms, and sunsets. He always kept his doors secured and his wits about him while sleeping in his car or in a budget motel. He preferred the seclusion of deserted roadways and the peace of tiny communities to large cities. He enjoyed every mile, and the road was his friend. When he arrived in New Mexico, Daniel was thrilled but weary. The sky was an unending dome of blue, and the terrain was both magnificent and austere. After touring the ruins of an old mining town for a day, he left in the late afternoon with the intention of driving for a few hours before locating a spot to stay overnight. It was almost deserted on the roadway. The only other cars were a decrepit V of the occasional pickup truck. The desert was being painted in crimson and gold hues as the sun was sinking. Daniel experienced a well-known calm that only arises when one is separated from everyone and everything. Daniel started searching for a secure spot to stop and rest as dusk grew. Just off the roadway, he noticed a tiny gravel turnout that was partially obscured by a scrubby mesquite stand. It was simple, with room for his car and a view of the vast desert. After parking and letting the cool evening air in through the windows, he took a seat and began writing in his journal about his adventures that day. The whisper of wind through the brush and the distant call of a coyote were the only sounds to break the deep calm. Daniel was secure, sheltered in his automobile, mesmerized by the beauty of the night and the beat of the road. He must have fallen asleep, because it was completely dark when he woke up. Uncertain of what had woken him, he woke up with a start and his heart racing. He listened for a moment, only the faint ruffle of the wind and the sound of his own breathing. He looked at his phone. To 13 a.m. He contemplated continuing to drive, but exhaustion prevailed. He closed his eyes, leaned back in his chair, and locked the doors. He was startled by a harsh sound. Awake. He initially believed it to be a dream. There was a slight, but persistent metallic scraping noise coming from below the vehicle. With all his nerves jangled, he sat up and listened. This time the sound was louder. And then there was the distinct crunch of gravel. Outside, someone was circling his automobile. Daniel's thoughts whirled. He reached for his phone, but it was flashing in the dark with only the sarcastic words and no signal. He thought about honking the horn, but was afraid it would agitate the person outside. Rather, he sat motionless and strained to look through the misty windows. Abruptly, someone squatted next to the rear tire in the moonlight. The blood in Daniel ran cold. The individual wore black clothing, with a hood covering their face. He was horrified to see the figure take a piece of metal with sharp edges out of a bag, spikes, and started placing it behind his car's back wheels. With a painful shock, Daniel recognized it as a homemade spike strip, the type that police officers use to halt evading cars. These individuals, whatever they were laying a trap. Daniel felt a wave of panic. As he looked around, he noticed two more individuals hiding in the shadows. One stood guard at the edge of the pullout, the other close to the front of the vehicle. He was confined by himself, miles away from assistance. He reflected about his life, his friends, and his family. He refused to end up as just another statistic or unresolved mystery on a desolate route. He considered his choices. He could be attacked when the men knew he was awake. He remained where he was. He would hit the spike strip and be left stranded at their mercy if he attempted to drive away. He wanted something to divert his attention and buy him some time. Daniel recalled his sister's gift of an emergency whistle on his keychain. He reached for it, inhaled deeply, and blew as forcefully as he could. The men outside were startled by the shrills that rang through the night. They froze for a moment, staring about in bewilderment. Daniel grabbed the opportunity. He turned on the engine, pushed the car into reverse, and swerved sharply to the left. After barely avoiding the spike strip and lurching across the gravel, the vehicle sped back onto the highway. One of the men threw something that hit the back window with a loud crack as the other men yelled. Daniel didn't turn around. The car fishtailed on the loose gravel before gaining grip on the road as he blasted the accelerator. Headlights pierced the darkness as he raced down the highway, his heart racing. Daniel drove in a blind panic 4 miles, looking in the mirrors for any indication that someone was after him. There was nobody on the road. The engine's roar and his own labored breathing were the only sounds. He continued driving till he came to a well-lit petrol station on the periphery of a tiny town. Shaking, he staggered inside and explained the situation to the cashier. The men and the spike strip were long gone when the cops arrived, notwithstanding their call to shaken to sleep. Daniel stayed in the petrol station for the remainder of the night. The truth of how near he had actually catastrophe struck him in waves, how he almost lost everything because of a simple decision to stop at the incorrect time and location. His voice shaking, he called his family and told them the incident. His father was furious and his mother was crying. "Come home," his sister said. However, Daniel was committed to completing his trip and regaining the sense of independence that had always drew him to the road. He had the vehicle inspected for damage the next day. "I'm glad there are just a few scratches and a broken tail light," he persisted, but the encounter altered him. He got agitated, alert, staying away from solitary gatherings, and never dozing off in the car unless he was in a well-lit, crowded place. He followed his gut and paid attention to the tiny voice alerting him when something didn't seem right. He had never understood before, yet the road was still his haven. How hazy the real boundary between danger and safety was. Daniel turned his incident into a warning, which he shared with other travelers in online forums, truck stop coffee shops, and campsite coffee shops. He advised others to follow their gut feelings, be vigilant, and never take the road for granted. He discovered that the roadways were not as safe as they appeared, that other people had fallen into similar traps, and that his experience was not unusual. Have you ever taken a trip? A tranquil ride might soon turn into a nightmare if you've ever been alone and felt the hair on the back of your neck rise up for no apparent reason. Although freedom can be found on the open road, danger might lurk in the shadows, where everything might alter with a single error. Therefore, keep Daniel in mind the next time you go on a road trip. Follow your gut, remain vigilant, and never dismiss the feeling that something is off. Because the most terrifying monsters aren't often the ones you anticipate. They are the ones that patiently, quietly, and in the dark wait for you to down your defenses. Please leave a comment below if you have a similar tale or if you have ever managed to escape a potentially disastrous scenario. Your encounter might be the warning that prevented the death of another person. Share your story with others. Let it serve as a beacon for those who are in the dark. Additionally, if you've read this far, if these tales have inspired you to please reconsider your decision and subscribe to the verified Fierce Horror Stories channel. Become a part of our community of believers, listeners, and survivors, and assist us in communicating that alertness, and it can make all the difference to have bravery. Be careful out there. Keep your loved ones close, ones that are near. Also, keep in mind that every mile is a present. Fear should not stop you from living, but remember that the world can alter in a split second. Your narrative is important. Distribute it. And on the journey ahead, let's keep each other safe. Keep each other safe.